Canada is massive. You can fly from one coast to the other for 6 straight hours and still be over Canadian soil, staring down at endless forests, frozen lakes, and untouched wilderness. Yet for all that space, so much of it is empty. No cities, no highways, sometimes not even a road. It's the world's second largest nation, stretching nearly 10 million square kilometers, almost the size of all of Europe, but with fewer people than the state of California. That fact alone sounds impossible. How can something so enormous hold so few lives? Most people point to the cold, snowstorms, long winters, frozen tundra, and call it a day. But that explains only part of it. The deeper truth is written into the bones of the land itself, in the story of how Canada's geography and history quietly trapped nearly all of its 39 million citizens along a narrow ribbon at the southern edge, hugging the warmth of the US border. If you look closer, that emptiness isn't random. It's a design, a map of survival carved by nature and reinforced by centuries of human habit. Glance at a globe, that vast northern mass covering most of the top half of North America. That's Canada. It reaches from the Pacific to the Atlantic and then up beyond the Arctic Circle, a sweep of territory so large it touches 3 oceans at once. Europe is only slightly bigger, yet Europe packs in over 750 million people. Canada, not even 40 million. It's like taking the entire population of California and spreading it across an entire continent. That's why the average density is barely 4 people per square kilometre. There are apartment blocks in New York that have more residents than some of Canada's northern provinces. You could drive across entire regions without meeting another soul. Nearly everyone chooses the same slice of land, the southern fringe where life is possible. The rest of the map is wilderness so vast that entire European nations could fit inside and vanish without a trace. If it were just about temperature, countries like Norway or Russia would be empty too, but they're not. So what makes Canada different? To find the answer, you have to look beneath the forests and lakes into the ancient rock that forms the country's foundation. A creation so vast it literally shaped the fate of every Canadian who came after. Beneath the soil lies a sleeping giant, the Canadian Shield. It's not just rock, it's prehistory itself. Formed billions of years ago, it's one of the planet's oldest geological scars, a massive horseshoe of stone that wraps around Hudson Bay and spans nearly half the nation's area. And it's utterly unforgiving. The shield's surface is jagged and broken, with cliffs slicing through shallow soil and countless lakes filling its cracks. Winters here can erase sunlight for months, freezing even the ground solid. The thin, acidic earth can't grow much beyond spruce trees and moss. Try to plow it, and you hit granite within inches. Without soil, there's no farming. Without farming, there's no stable civilization. So when the first colonists arrived, they avoided this stone desert and clung to the rare patches of fertile land around the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence River. Geology, not politics, drew Canada's first invisible border, a line between where humans could live and where the land refused to let them. Combine that rough terrain with 6-month winters, and you understand why so much of Canada remains wild. In a way, the Shield acts like a natural fortress, beautiful to look at, impossible to conquer. Even beyond the Shield, the climate doesn't exactly roll out a welcome mat. Canada spans 6 time zones, from mild coasts to Arctic tundra. In many regions, winter temperatures plunge below -20 degrees Celsius, and daylight can disappear for weeks. That's why almost 95% of Canadians live within 160 kilometers, about 100 miles, of the US border. In that narrow zone, life gets easier. There, the Great Lakes work like giant furnaces and freezers, soaking up warmth in summer and releasing it during the cold season. The water buffers temperature swings, keeping nearby lands far milder than the frozen expanses farther north. Warm, moist air rising from the Gulf of Mexico occasionally pushes northward too, creating small pockets of fertility where crops can actually thrive. Those mild areas became Canada's breadbasket, a rare strip of arable land stretching roughly 700 miles from Windsor to Quebec City. Outside that corridor lies a completely different world. Mineral-rich forests, oil fields, and tundra that can support workers but not entire cities. Geography itself almost feels alive, quietly steering people back south toward warmth, soil, and sunlight. But it wasn't only nature at work here. History, and one particular river, finished what geography started. Long before Canada became a country, the St. Lawrence River dictated where its people would settle. It was the one easy entryway into North America's interior. When French explorers sailed in the 1500s, the St. Lawrence wasn't just a route. It was a highway of survival. Ships could glide deep inland, bringing soldiers, supplies, and settlers. But beyond modern-day Montreal, the violent Lacane Rapids made further travel impossible. That natural barrier forced trade to concentrate right there, and Montreal was born. As decades passed, canals and locks bypassed the rapids, and by the 1950s, the St. Lawrence Seaway opened, letting ocean vessels travel directly from the Atlantic to the Great Lakes. That changed everything. Towns along the route, Toronto, Kingston, Hamilton, Montreal, Quebec City, turned into industrial and cultural magnets. Immigrants from around the world followed the flow of trade, building the cities that still dominate Canada today. In a nation where distance crushes most ambitions, proximity to that river meant opportunity. The southern border effectively became the lifeline of Canada, where transport, climate, and fortune all aligned. Once trade took root along the St. Lawrence and the Great Lakes, growth became unstoppable. Ports turned into towns, towns became cities. Each new factory or rail line drew more people. The Windsor-Toronto-Montreal corridor evolved into a glowing ribbon of civilization, slicing through the wilderness. Toronto leapt from a modest port of 80,000 people in the 1800s to a metropolis of more than 2 million a century later. Montreal blossomed into a powerhouse of culture and industry. Even newer cities like Winnipeg, Edmonton, and Calgary grew in the same southern belt, always within reach of transport, farmland, and bearable weather. Meanwhile, the north stood still, rich in resources but poor in infrastructure. Building roads through permafrost or around mountain lakes cost fortunes. Most mining towns stayed temporary, fading once the ore ran out. From orbit you can see the result, a narrow string of light across the bottom of a dark, silent expanse. That glowing line tells the story of a nation built not by its borders, but by its geography. Mackenzie King once joked, "If some countries have too much history, we have too much geography." He wasn't wrong. Canada's immensity is both its strength and its curse. Endless resources, endless distances. The three northern territories, Yukon, Northwest Territories and Nunavut, cover 40% of Canada's land but contain barely 3% of its people. Some communities can only be reached by plain or frozen winter roads. Building hospitals, schools or internet lines across regions, this vast costs a fortune. So federal investment naturally piles up in the south where most taxpayers live. That imbalance shapes everything. Politics, economics, identity. Ontario and Quebec wield the population and influence. The North carries the resources that power the economy. Canada often feels like two nations layered together, one dense and urban, one vast and quiet. Yet there's promise hidden in that emptiness. In a world running out of land, silence and clean water, Canada holds all three in abundance. The government knows it. That's why Canada isn't afraid of growth. It's recruiting it. Through one of the world's most ambitious immigration plans, over 500,000 newcomers are set to arrive each year, aiming to strengthen a workforce stretched by distance and aging demographics. Every new arrival adds skills, taxes and culture, the lifeblood of a young, diverse nation. Meanwhile, climate change is redrawing the map. As the world warms, parts of Canada's north that were once ice-locked are opening. Longer growing seasons, new Arctic shipping lanes and access to untapped energy fields could transform areas that humans once considered unreachable. Technology adds another layer. Renewable energy grids, automated logistics and remote work are breaking the old limitations of distance. Cities like Edmonton, Saskatoon and Halifax are already booming, proving the future doesn't have to belong to Toronto and Montreal alone. Of course, growth brings risks. Indigenous lands, wildlife and fragile ecosystems face pressure as development moves north. Canada's challenge is to expand without destroying the very wilderness that defines it. To grow smarter, not just bigger. Still, many believe that in an age of scarcity, Canada's emptiness may be its greatest asset. When overpopulation drives others into crisis, the country's vast, cold spaces might just become the planet's last frontier. In the end, Canada's emptiness isn't a flaw. It's the logical result of its geology, its weather and its history, the grand equation that defines the nation. The shield carved its foundation, the climate narrowed its borders, and the St. Lawrence River filled in the thin line of life that runs along its southern rim. For centuries, everything north of that line remained silent, forcing Canadians to thrive wherever warmth and trade would allow. And yet that silence also preserved something rare, an entire wilderness still unspoiled. While other countries suffocate under sprawl, Canada still has untouched frontiers filled with fresh water, clean air, and resources the planet will one day need to survive. So why is Canada so empty? Because the land demanded it. The rock beneath, the winter above, and the rivers between all conspired to shape a nation at the edge of the habitable world. Maybe it isn't empty at all. Maybe it's just waiting. Waiting for the next generation, the next discovery, the next great reason to fill all that space, because sometimes the quietest places tell the biggest stories.